Okay, maybe a little tired because I'm working with this technology, and this is third time I've tried with this. So let's look at the topic today. The topic today is scientific protectionists, free trade, fair trade, whatever term you want to use. Unfortunately, what's stuck out there in the world is protectionism, and that is it's a bad term, quite frankly. It's a misleading term, and it's a term that can be exploited. Although years ago, for 100 years, from Henry Clay, well, more than 100 if you add Henry Clay in right after the Revolution, Abraham Lincoln really started the Republican protectionist movement, which lasted almost 80 years. And was one of the most successful manufacturing periods that the United States ever went through. The guy that really brought the real muscle to it then was William McKinley, and we'll talk about that. When we talk trade, okay, you got to talk about some extremes. One extreme, Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, the famous book, written the year of our revolution, okay, 1776. The problem with Adam Smith is nobody's read his book. I should say, very few people. It's a 900-page monster. Probably the only people, not all of them do, is economists probably read it at some point in their life, and operations managers read it for a different reason. There is a chapter in there on manufacturing, but we're also interested in the trade. But Adam Smith lived in Glasgow, Scotland, we say 1776. There were no factories. The steam engine wasn't even in use in those days, okay? So what you have is what he saw trade, and trade was big business in his day, international trade. He saw it, okay, from the standpoint of agricultural products. Trade, international, was huge. The United States, or then the colonies, were sending tons of wheat, ginseng, and furs. These are the big trading, and iron to England. Well, they sent it to Scotland first. Scotland was the warehousing operation where they bid and set the prices, retail, wholesale prices, then moved on to Europe. And that's where the heart of what would become known as capitalism sprung up. So that was his view, Adam Smith's view. But he also took exception there. Nobody notes this either, because you got to read the book closely, because we got to get through 50 pages of the Corn Laws, which are archaic laws that nobody knows what they are today. But he said, there are some exceptions to this free trade thing. If a country's lifeblood, like France, depends on wine, they have a right to protect their product. If it's like England, the defense and shipbuilding industry, they have a right to protect that industry. Okay, so he took some exceptions. He had to. I mean, he had trouble getting his book published in Europe if he didn't take some exceptions. So you have Adam Smith, misused so often. Okay, and I'm not even going to encourage you, although you have a copy of Wealth of Nations, to read it. It's in Old English, and it's a difficult read, but if you can struggle through it. O'Rourke, which is a Toledo author, wrote a book, and I forget the name right off, on Wealth of Nations, a humorous book. He's a comedian, not a comedian, but a humorous writer. I would say take a look at that, read that. It might be a little fun. On the other extreme, okay, is, William McKinley, okay? Here, you have the President of the United States, but he started in Congress in 1878, became chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, which is the most powerful, and still is the most powerful committee. It set the tariff and trading regulations at the time. McKinley followed all the Republicans prior to him, starting with Lincoln. Lincoln protected American industry, even during the Civil War. And it was difficult to buy American in the Civil War, but he also realized, like Henry Clay, and even maybe the first, Alexander Hamilton, who wrote the first paper from a federal employee, okay, and he wrote it on trade. and manufacturing, how this country needed to become a manufacturing country. So William McKinley embodied it all and then brought it to a head and brought us to the golden years of manufacturing. So we'll talk more about him as well. Unfortunately, and I'm a conservative, my conservative brothers tend to think that you can't be a conservative if you're not for, quote, free trade. Well, trade's not free. The only free trade I'm aware of is between, and even this has some minor differences, is between state lines like Ohio and Michigan, okay? Trade between America and China is totally different ballgame. I mean, different costs, different government regs, different cultural, economic setups. To expect to trade on an equal basis just based on setting a price, okay? You can't expect it, especially when one country, for example, China, is interested in full employment. In the United States, probably more interested in keeping prices down. But we'll talk more about that, okay? Let's look at next at, maybe how you look at this. Let's look at a $20,000 car, okay, manufactured in the United States, okay? Again, I'll try to get to this. Healthcare would be $4,000 of that price, okay? Now think about that for a minute, okay? The United States is the only one that puts health care into their product cost. Remember, Obamacare is still paid for by the employer. Everywhere else in the world, maybe in China, they don't really have health care, okay? In Europe, everybody has health care, but it's paid for by the taxpayer. It's not put on the product cost, okay? So there's no 4,000 add. In the United States, we have pensions, at least the big companies, and some of the smaller. That would account for $1,500. Okay, that's going down because companies are trying to do creative things to get out of that. Then you've got regulation, and we are the most regulated in the world, mainly environmental, and that's nothing wrong with that. Okay, but these other countries don't have that in their product cost. And then we've got, of course, wages, and we should have high wages. Free trade as it exists today actually forces wages down all over the world, okay? Because you go to the lowest denominator, which is slave labor, basically, okay? So you can see the issue there is quite big. And then there's some other costs. These are the costs that accountants always struggle with. There's the cost of freedom. We do a lot for the world. We police the world. We spend a lot of money at that. And we don't ask anything in return. But we should at least demand fair trade for that. And then you've got the workers' perspective. They say, look, in years past, when the government wants to fight a war, okay, our sons and daughters have been there. They've lost their lives. They've given their blood. Only to come back to a country that now trades their jobs as a poker chip in a political game. We say, Russia, if you do this politically, we'll let you bring your steel in dirt cheap. So those things are hardly fair. So I like the term fair trade, but it never took. Okay, and other people might say, well, why don't you just fair trade, free trade is capitalism. Not so. Capitalism is can be national capitalism. And more fittingly, that's where it belongs. The only way capitalism can function on equal footing. Okay? Right now with the trade, we have a World Trade Organization, okay, that makes these decisions. What we're getting is not capitalism worldwide, we're getting international socialism. This body out of the UN basically distributes the wealth. And they're very anti-American, to be quite frank, and somewhat anti-Europe. So the industrial countries lose on this, okay? And that wouldn't even be a bad thing, but we're not, the unindustrialized are not getting the wage benefits or anything else. They're getting basically low wages and slavery over it. So we've got some things to do there, I think, to come to what I would call fair trade, or what I like to call scientific protectionism or scientific trade. Okay, so how do we deal with these? I mean, you also got complaints. This is the two common arguments they'll use again. Well, the one they'll always use, again, and protectionists like me, we sit at the table with flat earthers and people the mainstream think they're a little crazy. Okay, so they're good people, a lot of fun to eat lunch with, but that's where you're put today, because they've ingrained over the years that capitalism equals, quote, free trade, or what really is only for us is tariff-free trade, our way. They tariff us. So it's a crazy system. If anybody really looks at it, and these conservative brothers of mine really take a hard look at it to see that protectionism is really a pillar of conservatism and nationalism. And there's nothing wrong with nationalism, okay? The other argument they'll make is it'll cause trade wars, okay? We'll see if you use the Republican Lincoln model over the years, they avoided trade wars based on a concept known as reciprocity. Reciprocity meant you buy $1 worth of our goods, we buy $1 worth of yours, okay? Today it's way out of whack. Now, McKinley didn't hold them tightly to that, but relatively tightly. Okay, it wasn't a 1 billion to 1 type ratios, or maybe today it's easily 1 million to 1. So you've got that. The other thing that McKinley used, and it really started earlier than him, but again, I look at him as the premier defender of protectionism, was that he gave Congress a job. They had a sitting committee, a commission, trade commission, okay, tariff commission is actually what they called it, to look at these things and make the adjustments, to look at where the trade was fair, whether they were dumping. McKinley came from a manufacturing background. His dad was an iron worker. His dad had lost his job a number of times because of British dumping iron into this country, cheap prices. He knew the hurt at the family dinner table, okay? Adam Smith didn't know that hurt. So he also was the premier man. And here he was, tied to big business, and he was. But the distinction we have to make is it was big business. Big banking was separate. Henry Morgan, the big banker at the time, J.P. Morgan, okay, wanted as much trade as possible, and he didn't care which way, and that's true today. Big banking, it's like a casino. The volume of trade is where they make their money. It doesn't matter which way it goes. So we've always had this division between manufacturing people in big business and big banking. And big banking is sort of one with the free trade argument since the 80s, okay? So you've got that. We've got, the other thing the commission did was another complaint argument that free traders will make. Well, if you tariff products coming in, these businesses will make a big profit because there won't be, quote, any competition, okay? This commission required companies to come in every year, show their profits, and they didn't mind if they made a profit, but they wanted to see that they were investing in plant expansion and jobs. If they did, there was no problem. If they didn't, they may get a reduction in the tariff on that product. Like I say, it was scientific, it was intense, a lot of people working on it, manpower, okay? I mean, Congress was busy. They don't like to be that busy. It'd be hard today. So you had that overview, very important, okay? Also, the idea that you wouldn't have competition, okay? What we had is national competition. You had 20-some steel companies. The prices stayed down during this great period, okay, of McKinley because of that. So again, you can have national capitalism, okay? And there was tremendous investment. Plants were being built everywhere, okay? The other thing you need to do is Unilateral agreements. We hear the president talking about that today. Why unilateral? Well, it's too complex, I just said the differences. Unilateral, you can deal with the idea of reciprocity directly. You can deal with the differences in wages, health benefits, and so forth. And by the way, by doing that, by putting tariffs on products, okay, based on our healthcare costs and so forth, we improve the rest of the world, because we do that with countries that don't have healthcare and so forth for their workers. If they get healthcare and so forth for their workers, then we adjust the tariffs down. Okay? So it can be, a very, it can also be a liberal plank, and an improvement for the world. I mean, right now, basically what you've got is everybody's moving down towards slave labor, or very close to slave labor, okay, on wages with this international socialism, okay, and that's what it is. Make no mistake about it, okay. The other thing you need, like I say, you got to stop using this as a poker chip in a game where we trade American jobs to get a country to do something for us. That's crazy. And the people are coming against that. We see that over the years in elections, especially in the old Rust Belt. People are saying, hey, enough's enough. And it's so bad, as we know, that even with countries like China, not only don't we get fair trade, but they don't even give us political benefits for giving it. And they charge us 25% on our products going in, and we charge nothing on theirs coming in. That's where we've gotten to, okay? And that's what people say are enlightened, and that's capitalism, and that's all the good stuff. Well, it's not. You got to realize that. So, that's what we've got to be looking at, what we can do, okay, as a manufacturer. And you might say, well, how do we even stay in the ballgame? Well, over the years, believe it or not, energy prices have kept us in the ballgame for 200 years. Other people saying, this is one thing I forgot to mention, I should mention, is, well, why can't we just have, quote, this free trade or tariff-free trade and have Buy American campaigns? Well, Buy American campaigns don't work, okay? And the simple reason is it's unfair to ask the citizen to sacrifice his family that needs money. The government should be taking care of that inequality coming in from the product. Should be made to make that decision. I buy American cars. My dad did, I always will. I try to buy American, it's almost impossible, okay? And there's another part of the argument, okay? We are becoming, as an old Air Force officer, I realized this, dependent on parts and manufacturing for our wartime industries. Some of our planes actually require products made in different countries. We're going to make fighter jets in India. Now, India is an ally right now, but, do we really want to do that? Okay. I might also, when I say that, I might also say some companies have responded on an international basis well. I think, and I was against the Japanese pretty heavily in the 1980s, but what they did is they came in and said, look, we'll build plants in your country and use your labor. That's fair. Now that type of trade, that's reciprocity on a different level, but it works, okay? And I think it adjusted for the complaints of taking away jobs. And the Germans do that to a large degree. I don't mind that, and I think that's one approach. But we've got to look for these things. Like I say, it's an imbalance, and it's not fair to anybody. And I believe in my heart, like Alexander Hamilton did when he issued the first federal paper by a government official as he was Secretary of Treasury, and said, a country must manufacture to exist. When you stop manufacturing, okay, you stop being a great nation. When England went to free trade, and they went to it years decades ahead of us, you saw the decline of the Great British Empire. Okay? It will happen. You become dependent. People argue, well, we've got, the other argument, I guess one last argument, there's so many, but they'll argue, the world's different now. The jobs are informational jobs, or post-industrial, Well, I can tell you, since the 1980s, I'm sick of getting government money to retrain our unemployed workers that never get hired in these new jobs. I mean, we have made retraining a business for the education industry. We've done it over and over and over again, and it's truly sad. And I've been involved in this. A lot of my conservative friends say, well, why would you take government money and It's sad. Retraining auto workers, something like 400 during the Obama years to take solar jobs, which they never got. But I'll tell you who did get wealthy, the community colleges, and they sort of had middlemen that brought the people into the courses and so forth. None of those poor people got jobs. I mean, retraining is a fallacy, okay? And by the way, we spend so much on retraining, we could, simply if we protected our industries, or even if the government built plants, it'd be cheaper to keep people employed than it is to do this retraining stuff, which is a constant thing. You hear it all the time. Politicians love it. And they get to come into the community and say, I'm going to bring all this retraining money to you. But the resistance now in the Rust Belt areas, they see it like I do. I mean, we have 50 years of this retraining stuff. Where are the jobs? Where's the beef, as they used to say in the 80s? So there's a lot to this issue. And I think you've got to look at the manufacturing perspective. We've got to break out of this paradigm of quote, free trade. It's not that simple. It's a war, and it's a war we're losing. I mean, the military, even in the recent years, has started to look at trade as a type of war. Our cities look like they've been bombed out, the industrial cities. So I think, we've got to worry about all the new techniques, lean manufacturing, and so forth. Okay? But we can't fail to address the big elephant in the room, the big political elephant that holds our manufacturing down. And that's this, quote, business of free trade. Okay, guys, thanks. I hope you take a look at my manufacturing manifesto. You don't have to read it. It's optional. Try to take a little bit of, if you can, of Wealth of Nations. I don't expect you to get into that. You should read some things prior about it, actually. It's a difficult read, so